everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Superintendent's Report. I'm Carol Birdsong, and joining me for our discussion is Williamson County Schools Superintendent Jason Golden. And we are going to talk about several topics from legislation to TCAP testing to our budget. But first, I want to start with an annual event that we hold in April, and it is called our Shining Apple Volunteer Awards, and that is coming up in the next week, and I want to give you the opportunity to brag on our wonderful school volunteers.
Well, you mentioned Shining Apple, and we have had this Shining Apple Award. Carol, you probably remember the exact number of years. It's been 20 plus years, and your team actually created this award over time. It celebrates our volunteers, and of course there's a tradition in schools that really probably dates back 100 plus years about an apple for the teacher, and I think that was probably a little bit of the impetus for creating the Shining Apple Awards. Our school volunteers do an amazing job for our students, for our teachers, for our entire culture in our building, and one of those key points that really sets us apart from so many other groups across the country is our parent involvement. I often talk to parents about the numbers. For example, last year we received about $13 million in parent support through our PTOs, through our booster clubs, and so much of that money went directly to students. The services that we provide our students, a lot of the extracurricular activities. They also support our teachers and give them little boost here and there across the school year. But one of the key points I make after mentioning those overwhelming numbers is time. There's really no substitute for time. In so many ways in human existence, there's really no substitute for time. And our parents pour so much time and effort into supporting the work that we do. And one of those key things we do with our Shining Apple Awards is celebrate the time, the value that our parents are giving so much of our programming throughout the school year. So each school has an award for their volunteer of the year, and we call it the Shining Apple Award.
And it could be a parent, it could be a grandparent, could be a community volunteer, it could be a community group. So it is a wonderful evening for sure.
Sometimes it's a business business that has really poured themselves into a school over a particular year. We'll have next door neighbor businesses that just find a way to adopt schools. Like you said, sometimes it's a parent, and the stories are always great. No matter what the story is, it's something special. And to me, it reflects, again, that difference in Williamson County.
You know, we started a couple of years ago with videos where our Good News ambassadors, we have one at each school, would record a message from sometimes it's that volunteer's own child or different children or different ones saying sweet messages about how much they appreciate that volunteer. Tears do flow. Tears do flow on Shining Apple Night, for sure.
Sometimes a parent might hear from their own child things they've never heard from their own child because the child's in front of the camera.
That's right.
And love is shared. Just to put it as clearly and as best I can, students will share their love with those volunteers.
It's very sweet. And we will be sure and include that in our InFocus email newsletter. It won't be next week, but it'll be the week after. So stay tuned for that for sure. All right, let's get down into the business of Williamson County Schools. We are in our last 9 weeks. Can you believe it? This school year is zooming by.
As we record this, we've actually been in our last 9 weeks ever since we got back from spring break. And time is flying. We're in mid-April. Tax day has passed.
Yes.
Actually, we have our open zone process, and April 15th was also our deadline for open zone requests for next year. So even in the schools, April 15th has some meaning. But our students are taking TCAP. As we sit here and record, some of our schools are actually in the middle of TCAP, which is the statewide, state-required testing. That window is opened. It's going to close in about a week or so from when we're recording. And then our teachers spend those last few weeks of school really drilling down to the specific standards that they have evaluated that our students need to finish up the year and get them prepared for their next year in school.
Let's talk about TCAP testing and talk about what grade levels take the standardized testing, and then there's also something called end of course exams. So talk about the grade levels that are taking the TCAP testing, and then what all that entails.
So TCAP is the state required testing, and it is scheduled for grades 3 through 8. Third grade is officially the first year for TCAP. I've got to go off on a little bit of a rabbit trail.
I hope you do.
This has been bothering us for a few years. A couple of years ago, the state legislature passed a law that in essence said that students in third grade who take the ELA portion of TCAP cannot advance to fourth grade unless they meet a certain standard on TCAP, that first year they take it. And the basic theory behind that is some research that indicates if students haven't learned how to read by third grade, their chances of success, of graduating, of having success after school, of actually learning how to read is greatly reduced. The irony of all that is third grade TCAP doesn't test reading. It tests the standards for third grade English and math that the state has set out. But in any event, there's now a high...
It's a high stakes test now.
Thank you. It's a high stakes test. There's a lot of stress that now is associated for third graders, for 8-year-olds, with that test. As part of that, that's the first year. We have actually added this year's second grade TCAP, which is a kind of a pilot that the state's made available. We have traditionally not done it because generally speaking we take enough tests, but we've added that this year for second graders, mainly for the reason to give second graders familiarity with the test before they hit that high stakes third grade that the legislature created for us. So this year, for us, it's grades 2 through 8 for TCAP. They've also included in the state standards for teacher evaluations, there's some impact of those tests on teacher evaluations as well. So we've had to balance that for second graders, that we're really taking the test as second graders to familiarize them with it before they hit third grade, but it also has the potential to have a little bit of impact on second grade teachers' evaluations. It's just amazing the volume of regulations that we have from the state. But in any event, it's grades 3 through 8. The process we go through over the course of the school year is to teach our students those important standards that the state's established. This is the time for the students to evidence and show that they have mastered those standards. Historically, our students do really well. Historically, as a whole, Williamson County is, if not the highest performer in the state, among the highest performers as you address each of those tests. And we've dealt with that stress and helped our students through that over these last couple of years. As an example of that, we had our board meeting last night, and we had an elementary school group of singers from the music teacher sing, and they sang some songs from some productions, Matilda and that kind of thing, but they also had a TCAP song that just made me laugh. It had some language like, you can take a bathroom break if you need it, and those kinds of things, really just to try to add a little bit of lightness to the TCAP prep, because we are trying to balance what the legislature has done with the reality that we're serving children through this process.
It is a high stakes test. It's basically a one-day snapshot, if you will, on that the students use, and there is no input from the teacher, if you will. It is what it is. It causes stress for those kiddos, those small people. It causes stress for those teachers as well, and for the parents. I'm going to say for the family unit.
Well, and let me tell you the key way that we've addressed that. We've worked through the school year to prepare students and help them have an understanding of where they are well before the test comes. I've heard this compared to the difference between an autopsy and a doctor's visit. Rather than wait till this last minute, we prepare. And isn't that a life lesson for most everyone? If you know a crisis point is coming, you prepare. And then that crisis point becomes less of a crisis. So what our teachers do through the year is work together. They will give tiny assessments through the course of the school year. We call them common formative assessments, just to get a gauge on where students are once a particular lesson has been taught, once a particular standard has been taught. They can evaluate just very quickly, have our students showed mastery. If our students have not shown mastery, then the teachers as teams can adjust their instruction and make sure that before they move on to the next point, their students have generally shown some mastery. So that by the time the crisis comes at the end of the school year, students have had some familiarity. They've shown over the course of time that they know these standards, and so the stress has been reduced as much as we reasonably can. One specific thing we've done, and we're in our second year at the elementary schools with this, is we have some time where teachers actually collaborate. We've identified specific afternoons over the course of the school year where students get out of school a couple of hours ahead of time, and teachers spend time doing just what I talked about. They evaluate those assessments and they plan and make adjustments in their pacing of their curriculum over the course of the school year, so that those fears and those crisis points are not nearly as difficult as they could be if we didn't do that prep. So I want to thank our parents. It was a difficult transition. We actually had 13 specific days at the elementary level where we've had an early release so teachers can do that. We added 7 minutes to our school day every day so that we could, in essence, buy that time. I am convinced that's made a difference. I am convinced that's helped our students show growth. And given that time for teachers to adjust, that proverbial doctor's visit, so they can adjust on the fly rather than wait once a year to see how our students have done.
Let's say a third grade student, does not have a successful TCAP result. What are those next steps for those families?
So under Tennessee law, there's a structure that they have a choice of either going to summer school or taking tutoring over the course of the next year, or both, depending on where their scores fell. And we had a few students do that last year. Now, if they don't show growth in the next year, some of those students are actually at risk in fourth grade currently. We actually had 134 out of our 3,500 or so third graders last year in that category. So 134 of our fourth graders need to show what's called adequate growth to be able to move on to fifth grade and not be retained. Currently, as we record this, it's that one test for those fourth graders, that English portion of that one test for fourth graders that they're at risk for. Right now at the legislature, there's actually a pending bill that might give them one more avenue to avoid being retained in fifth grade. But those 134 students in our district are facing that right now. And again, it's about their mastery of the fourth grade standards, not whether they can read, but whether they have shown mastery of those fourth grade standards. English standards actually have a lot of overlap from one grade level to the next, what we call ELA, English Language Arts. So those students are facing that. Last year, as third graders and our current third graders, if they don't perform to the state level, then they will choose between summer school, which is a 4-week program in June. They call it summer camp, summer learning camp, but it's summer school, or tutoring over the course of the next year, or both. We've had some success with that. I actually have seen that summer program work pretty well. It's actually a good program for our students, so I like that intervention. What we worry about is the long-term impact for a child who might be facing their senior year at age 19. And I worry about the impact of that because there's also research that indicates the likelihood of children graduating when they're that old is not good either.
Mm-hmm. That's right. All right. Let's talk quickly about end of course tests, because there are a handful of those, or maybe 2 handfuls, for our upper grade students that they take that are state required. So talk about end of course.
So the state has end of course tests for some high school courses: Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, English 1, English 2, Biology, and U.S. History. Those are the end of course tests. And those go in as part of the student's grade at the high school level. So in addition to the exams that we have, there's that state end-of-course test that the state prepares that we treat as a standardized test with all the protections and protocols of a standardized test. So all our students in those courses will take that. Now, some of our students actually take AP, Advanced Placement courses. For example, AP U.S. History. Those students who are in those advanced classes may not actually take the U.S. History end of course test. So 30% or so of our students historically will take the AP courses, and the remaining 70% take some of those courses. Some of those AP classes, AP English, AP Biology. So not everyone is taking those state EOCs. They might just be taking their final exam a little bit later on.
Okay. So basically, end of April through through the rest of the school year, we have a lot of testing going on, from final exams at the very, very end. And then before we know it, the class of 2024 will be walking across the stage for graduation.
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about TCAP and end-of-course tests, and we have to get the results now before the end of the school year, because at that third grade level, we have to decide, and parents have to decide, do I go to the summer school or not? So we're getting the results a lot quicker than we used to. But you mentioned graduation. It's a happy time. We're here in mid-April, and you and I talked about this over the years. The springtime on a high school campus is one of the best times, in my opinion. The sun's shining. Well, sometimes it rains. Yeah. The sun is shining. There's a lot going on. All the athletics going on. It's just a very alive time on our high school campuses. So I always encourage folks, find something to do on a high school campus, especially in the spring.
That's right. Proms are happening. It's so fun to drive around or drive through town and see everybody all dolled up and going out for dinner. Lots of photos.
And most everyone might be driving through town and see some students dressed up getting their photo in front of something pretty.
Very fun.
Nice.
Very fun. All right. Let's talk about something maybe not so fun. And that would be legislation that is taking place. So the state legislature has been in session now for a long time, it seems, and they've been busy. So which one do you want to talk about first?
Well, first, you mentioned legislation. At our board meeting last night, and even at our work session as we prepared, we really talked about three things. We talked about school issues, local issues, and state issues. Mm-hmm. The school issues are largely centered around TCAP this time of year. At the state level, the legislature is in session. There's been a lot of discussion statewide about some bills various legislators have put forth related to education.
Yes.
The big example that we hear so much about is vouchers or education savings accounts, where there's a proposal to take state funding and fund private schools. We've spent a lot of time at our board meetings these last few months talking about that, and so much of it for us centered around the state funding model. Williamson County schools get substantially less per student on average than the state proposals would fund private schools, and so that's been a big topic. What we've talked about is the state has the capacity to fund a little bit better and put less burden on our county government.
Right.
But these bills actually include spending that money elsewhere. I've heard discussion about highways. If there's funding available, why is there not more highway funding? So we recognize that the issues are a lot more broader than schools. But that's been a big topic. Right now it's still in session, so we're at the monitoring stage. Our board shared last month a resolution asking our state legislators to not pass anything that might have a negative impact on the success we've had. Mm-hmm. That vote actually was 7-5 among our 12 board members, and so it's just an indicator in this democratic process that we have in this great country that we have, that people will disagree. And so we know that's happening at the state level. We'll see what decisions they make. I will tell you that for us, no matter what comes down the pike, we've been dealing with those changes for decades, and we continue to do everything we can to help our students succeed. We've had a lot of support from our community, from our school boards over the years, from county government. Right now, our county government funds about 2/3 of our total per pupil expenditure. The state funds about 1/3. Our federal funding is pretty minimal, usually about 2% or so of our total.
But that is not the norm. Where locally, our local government is funding the majority of our budget. That is not the norm across the state.
Not for Tennessee. There is a funding model at the state level that actually funds us less than some others. So to give you some specific numbers, this year, including all the state funding we've received, we are receiving on average about $4,400, just a little bit less than that per student. That's what we project based on the end of the school year and what we've received so far. The state proposal for vouchers or education savings accounts is to fund $7,075 to anyone up to 20,000 this year, up to 20,000 students this year who want to go to a private school. So we're getting a few $1,000s less than they propose to pay to others. That's part of what you talked about, that key. So that question has arisen locally. What about our students? Another big issue is students don't come in one clean package where the average cost is the average cost for everyone. Some students need more services, some students need less. That's the average. And so what we focus on is every student who shows up at our door gets the best service we can provide them, no matter what their needs are. And so we know that that's a struggle when it comes to just talking about average cost per student. So here's another little piece to that. Historically, in the most recent data we have from the state, our per pupil expenditure, our total per pupil expenditure, state and local, is somewhere around the 39th to 40th percentile statewide. We're one of the highest performing school districts in the state, often number one in so many measures, and our per pupil expenditure is below average. Our cost of living is at or near the top statewide, and yet our per pupil expenditure is below the statewide average. And so how does that show up? It's shown up in teacher salaries and staff salaries. About 85% of our budget is people, because that's what we do. We provide service. We're not generating a product that we manufacture. It's generating that quality for students. And so the net result is we struggle to compete in salaries because our per pupil expenditure is low.
And let's be real, on a teacher salary, on many of our staff members' salaries, you cannot afford to live in Williamson County.
And that old stereotype is true about the profession of teaching. Generally speaking, it's going to be less than many other professions. So we're constantly fighting that battle to try to create a professional living income for our teachers. So as an example, this year, our budget, I had many discussions with the county mayor, and they struggle with competing as well for county government positions because generally speaking, and I think this is right, generally speaking, government salaries are not the largest salaries in a community because we are working off tax money. We need to be conservative. This year, we're proposing a 6% pay increase. And frankly, based on the state funding and what we currently have, there's a gap in our budget. We serve 42,000 students, so the raw numbers can be overwhelming because of the volume of what we do. Right now, we're about 15 million short in funding for us to actually meet our budget and be able to give that 6% raise. So we've started that process with the county commission, trying to figure out a way, can we tighten that gap? What I know is our property tax rate, which for county government is one of the largest suppliers of the funding to promote our schools, which attracts people to our community, that tax rate has actually gone down over the years.
Substantially.
Substantially. Right now we are at $1.88 per $100 value for homes, and there's some complexity to it. But that tax rate went down 32 cents, actually 34 cents, I had the wrong number, 34 cents over the last time there's been a reappraisal. Prior to that, it was more than that. And so because the values of our properties have gone up, our county commission has historically been able to hold the line or even reduce the property tax rate based on increased property values. We're at a point now where that rubber's hitting the road and the county commission is going to have to evaluate, might we need to do something just a little bit different. That's not my decision to make.
No, that is the county commission's decision. They are our funding body.
And it's not our school board's decision to make. You mentioned the county commission is our funding body. Basically, the Tennessee structure is the school board decides what we need, and they put a budget together, and the county commission decides based on what they get from the state, can they afford it, and if so, how.
Okay. I'm confident that our county commission will get it done for Williamson County Schools and our 42,000 students. So, yeah, look forward to seeing how that turns out. Before we end, I want to talk about one more piece of legislation because I believe there's been some confusion out there, and hopefully you can clarify for folks. There's some legislation about arming teachers with weapons and guns, and talk about that legislation and what that would mean for us.
As most Americans know, and as we teach, we actually have two bodies in the legislature. We have a House and a Senate. There has been some legislation off and on over the years related to arming teachers with firearms. In this current legislative session, it's actually a 2-year legislative session. Last year, there was a bill in the House that was left on the House desk. In other words, no action was taken on it. And this year, that same bill went through the Senate and recently passed. The Senate, if I'm not mistaken, had somewhere around 6 amendments that were considered. They boiled down to actually 1 amendment passed. The essence of the Senate bill would put the decision on local governments to decide whether teachers should be armed. There's a lot of detail in it, but in essence, it would, if passed, put the burden on the superintendent of schools, the school principal, and the local law enforcement agency to decide if teachers should be armed. That's the Senate bill. Right now, there's been no action at the House on that, and there are 10 potential amendments sitting in the House.
Oh, wow.
So as we sit here,
Who knows?
I don't know that anything will pass, but what I do know is that one bill passed the Senate and is now sitting on the desk of the House related to that. If something passes, we've got to evaluate what that is. But let me tell you where I am when it comes to student safety. And I've spoken to this multiple times in thanking our commission for this particular point. Our SROs, our professional, licensed, trained deputy sheriffs in our building are our single biggest positive safety measure. There's a lot more to it. Hardening buildings, making sure that we have some protections on the exterior of the buildings, even mental health supports for students, but there's no substitute for people. Mm-hmm. Having those SROs in our buildings, professionally trained SROs, is the best thing we've ever done. It's one of the best things the County Commission has ever done for us. And we can't get by without them. Wherever the state goes, we're going to make sure that we as a local team have conversations to make sure that we keep our students as safe as we possibly can. I worry about it daily. The reality is we can't 100% across this country prevent bad actors and prevent bad behavior. What we can do is prepare for it professionally, and we are having those conversations with our sheriff's office. And if the state passes something else, then we're going to make sure we go through that process and do the best we can for all our students. It's not just about hope to keep students safe, it's about preparing and prevention. And our sheriff's office does a great job of that.
We have a great relationship, yes.
I want to talk about it just over and over again because it's on my mind all the time, but I want our families to know that while we can't guarantee the future, what we can do is we've got all the right professionals involved and we're making decisions to protect our families.
Okay, we're going to end on that note. Our time is up. So thank you all for joining us for the Superintendent's Report. Superintendent Golden, thank you for being here.